For weeks, astronomers thought they had seen it all. They had tracked 3I Atlas, analysed its spectrum, charted its path across the void, and everything about it seemed for a moment explainable. It was supposed to be a comet, just another frozen fragment wandering between the stars. But then came the new images, captured by NASA's Solar and Heliospheric Observatory and confirmed by the European Space Agency. The latest photos of 3I Atlas revealed something that defied every known behaviour of interstellar objects. The body hadn't broken apart as scientists predicted. It had changed shape. Its once diffuse coma had condensed into a sharp, luminous form, perfectly symmetrical, as if responding to something unseen. The raw data was staggering. High-resolution imaging showed what looked like a spiralling structure forming around its nucleus, not random dust jets or outgassing, but organised geometry. Each frame captured by the observatories seemed to show the spiral rotating, shifting in alignment with the sun's magnetic field. And that's when the murmurs began. Was 3 Atlas reacting to the sun, or communicating with it? If you've been following this mystery, you'll know this isn't the first time an interstellar visitor has challenged what we think we know about physics. Oumuamua did the same, accelerating without propulsion, tumbling like a mirror through the void. But 3 Atlas is different. It's closer, brighter, more deliberate. And this new imagery might be the moment scientists realise that we're not just observing a visitor, we might be witnessing a transformation. Before we dive into the data and what these images could mean for the future of our solar system, take a moment to subscribe and join us as we explore the universe's most unsettling discoveries, because tonight's one might just change how we define life itself. Now, let's look closer. At first glance, the images seem simple, a glowing nucleus surrounded by faintly illuminated dust, but when enhanced under polarized light, the symmetry becomes undeniable. The pattern isn't chaotic, it's structured. Spectral filters revealed electromagnetic emissions distributed evenly across the spiral arms, each spaced in precise intervals. That kind of regularity doesn't occur in natural fragmentation. It suggested timing, perhaps even rhythm. The most unsettling discovery came when the team at the ESA's Space Telescope Operations Center compared the new sequence to previous data from 3 weeks earlier. The structure hadn't simply rotated. It had realigned itself to face the sun's pole, the exact same orientation as the solar magnetic axis. This is where physics begins to strain under the weight of what's being observed. No comet, asteroid, or fragment of interstellar debris has ever demonstrated magnetic synchronization on this scale. For 3I Atlas to do so, it would have to contain materials capable of responding to fields at a molecular level, or be generating its own. As Dr. Elaine Navarro from the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics put it, this isn't a passive object. It's responding to its environment with precision. Responding, not reacting. That one word has split the astronomical community in two, because if 3I Atlas is indeed responding, then it's aware, not in the biological sense, but as part of a larger self-regulating system. Some suggest it could be a natural probe, a frozen mechanism left adrift by an ancient stellar civilization. Others propose a more grounded, though equally mysterious explanation. A self-organizing plasma construct, a natural phenomenon that behaves like a living field. Either way, what we're witnessing isn't random. NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory confirmed the next phase of imaging would involve spectral mapping using infrared data from the James Webb Space Telescope. The goal? Determine if 3I Atlas's structure contains organic compounds or crystallized silicates aligned by electromagnetism. If organic signatures are found, the implications would be staggering. For now, the most recent photo, time-stamped October 14th, 2025, shows a shape no one expected to see. It isn't disintegrating, it's stabilizing. The spiral has tightened, glowing brighter at its core. Some of the filaments appear to extend into fine, thread-like projections. Too even, too intentional. Whatever 3I Atlas is doing, it's not behaving like a dying comet. It's evolving into something new. And as scientists prepare the next observation window, they've realised something even stranger. Its trajectory hasn't changed, but its momentum has. The object has slowed by 0.043 meters per second. That's infinitesimal, almost meaningless, unless you understand what it means in the language of celestial mechanics. It's decelerating, deliberately, No natural force accounts for it. No gravitational assist explains it. The most precise instruments humanity has ever built are now tracking a visitor from the stars, and for the first time, the visitor seems to be watching us back. The next dataset arrived 36 hours later, a faint infrared capture, Webb's instruments scanning 3I's atlas across the 220-micron range. Most scientists expected to see the thermal profile of a cooling nucleus, nothing unusual, but the readings came back wrong. Instead of a fading signature, Webb's sensors recorded a temperature increase, not from the sun's radiation, but from within the object itself. Every hour, 3I Atlas's internal heat rose by a fraction of a degree, a slow, measured pulse of energy emerging from its core. At first, NASA engineers suspected sensor contamination, cosmic rays, solar interference, a miscalibration in the Webb's MIRI instrument. But the signal was clean, consistent, and, most alarmingly, rhythmic. Every 71 minutes the heat signature spiked, plateaued, and faded, like a mechanical heartbeat buried inside an object that shouldn't even be alive. By now, the world's observatories were all watching. The Very Large Telescope in Chile confirmed the cycle using mid-infrared spectroscopy, while Japan's Subaru Observatory picked up faint polarization shifts aligned perfectly with those pulses. 3I Atlas wasn't just reflecting light, it was emitting it, purposefully. NASA convened a late-night press briefing, one of those quiet, carefully worded sessions where the agency tries to say everything without saying anything at all. A senior analyst described it as unusual periodic activity, while internal memos later leaked referred to it more bluntly, self-generated thermal oscillation. That phrase shouldn't exist in astrophysics. Dr. Marisa Calder, a leading expert in interstellar materials at MIT, put it simply in a post that went viral. Either we're watching a comet wake itself up, or we've just found evidence of the first thermally active object from another star. And then came the color correction frames. When Webb's data was composited into a false color model, the image showed something extraordinary. The spiral wasn't made of dust. It was made of filamentary plasma. The strands connected like neurons, branching, fusing, exchanging energy. It looked eerily like a biological system, a cosmic nervous network suspended in sunlight. In the time-lapse, each pulse of energy rippled outward in perfect symmetry, every wave matching the periodic cycle NASA had detected. It was so consistent that one data scientist decided to overlay the frequency onto an audio file, translating it into sound. What emerged was not static, it was a tone, low, resonant, repeating, almost melodic. The heartbeat of 3 Atlas was not noise, it was order. Across social media, speculation exploded. Some called it an artificial beacon, others dismissed it as plasma interference. But within the scientific community, the tone sparked a deeper, quieter conversation, not about alien intelligence, but about cosmic self-regulation. Could 3 Atlas be a naturally occurring structure that mimics life, guided by the physics of the universe itself? Dr. Avi Loeb weighed in, cautioning against premature conclusions but acknowledging that 3I Atlas was unlike anything seen before. If it's communicating, he said in an interview, it might not be speaking to us, but to the star that birthed it. That one statement reframed everything. Because in the updated trajectory data, something had changed again. As 3I Atlas aligned itself with the sun's magnetic pole, small fluctuations appeared in the heliosphere, ripples in solar wind density that shouldn't have been there. It was as if the object's presence was resonating through the sun's plasma field. NASA's Solar Dynamics Observatory picked up a faint echo, a rhythmic disturbance matching the 71-minute cycle. For the first time, the sun was answering back. Engineers couldn't explain it. The frequencies were below any known coronal oscillation, too precise to be random. The sun was responding to something near it, something intelligent, or at least self-organizing. Meanwhile, amateur astronomers began noticing something peculiar in their own captures. When photographing 3I Atlas through filtered telescopes, faint luminous arcs appeared, not around the object, but extending behind it, like magnetic trails. Some of these arcs intersected Earth's orbital plane, invisible to the naked eye but glowing faintly in long exposures. At first, the images were dismissed as lens artifacts, but soon ESA confirmed the phenomenon. faint electromagnetic filaments stretching millions of kilometers outward. And they weren't static. They were moving. Very slowly, but consistently, the trails seemed to drift, like tendrils adjusting their position, synchronizing with solar currents. It was as if 3i Atlas wasn't just orbiting the Sun anymore. It was anchoring itself within it. By this point, the tone inside NASA had shifted completely. The public updates grew shorter, more cautious. The internal communications, those that leaked, were colder. Engineers were told to rerun every dataset, cross-check every reading. But behind the language of uncertainty was something unmistakable: fear. For decades, interstellar objects have been the dream of astrophysicists, fragments from beyond, stories written in dust. But 3i Atlas has become something else entirely. It's no longer a question of where it came from, but why it stayed. The new images, released only days ago, capture that realization perfectly. The spiral has narrowed further, its symmetry almost absolute. The central core now glows with a halo-like flare, not chaotic, but balanced, as if calibrated by something unseen. And within that light, faint radial markings form a pattern that doesn't belong to any known natural process. It's not random, it's not noise, it's intention. For now, all we can do is watch. 3i Atlas is no longer just passing through our solar system, it's becoming part of it. And if these images are any indication, something inside it, or behind it, has already begun. In the days that followed, the tone inside every major observatory shifted from fascination to unease. It began with a single dataset, one small discrepancy in the Sun's oscillation readings. At first, NASA's heliophysics division thought it was a calibration glitch in the Solar Dynamics Observatory. But then, the same fluctuation appeared in data from the Parker Solar Probe, and later, the European Space Agency's solar orbiter confirmed it. The Sun's magnetic rhythm was off by less than 0.001%, statistically meaningless, but not if you understood what caused it. Solar activity follows cycles, 11 years of rising, and falling magnetic polarity, as predictable as the tides. These variations take decades to shift. They cannot change in a matter of days. Yet, since 3i Atlas's stabilization near perihelion, something subtle had altered that rhythm. The Sun was pulsing differently. Dr. Leila Hahn, a solar physicist at the European Space Agency, noticed it first. A harmonic resonance, a faint beat superimposed over the solar field, repeating every 71 minutes, the same period as the thermal cycle inside 3i Atlas. The realization spread quietly through private channels. If the Sun's plasma field was being influenced, even microscopically, it meant one of two things. Either the interstellar object was generating a magnetic countercurrent, or the Sun was responding to something intelligent in kind. Whatever the explanation, it was enough to disturb the gravitational balance across the inner system. Within days, both JPL and ESA's horizon systems registered a measurable anomaly, a shift in the calculated orbit of Mercury, off by 1 part in 10 million. The correction was small, barely perceptible, but it matched perfectly with the timing of 3i Atlas's most recent pulse. Planetary scientists double-checked, then triple-checked the math. Nothing was wrong with the simulations. The effect was real. The word resonance began appearing in internal notes, first as a hypothesis, then as a warning. If 3i Atlas's electromagnetic field was coupling with the Sun's, it could theoretically create ripples in the solar wind density, invisible waves propagating outward, subtly altering orbits and magnetospheres. NASA publicly dismissed the reports, calling them statistical artifacts, but behind closed doors, an emergency symposium was convened between the ESA, JAXA, and the Indian Space Research Organisation. The question was no longer what 3i Atlas was, but how far its influence could reach. Outside the agencies, the reaction was quieter, but no less intense. Amateur astronomers began comparing timestamps of solar wind anomalies with auroral activity on Earth. They found something astonishing. Every 71 minutes, precisely in sync with the object's internal pulse, faint, measurable spikes appeared in Earth's magnetosphere, not strong enough to disrupt power grids or satellites, but there, unmistakably like the echo of a distant drumbeat. And then, on October 22nd, the beat changed. Instead of one steady pulse, the signal split. 2 harmonics, now slightly out of phase. The secondary rhythm was slower, weaker. but unmistakably planetary. It matched the Schumann resonance, Earth's natural electromagnetic heartbeat. The realization hit like cold water. For the first time, the pulse from an interstellar object had synchronized with Earth's own magnetic frequency. It wasn't just the sun anymore. Earth had joined the pattern. News of this never reached the public in full. NASA's space. Weather alerts grew vague, data streams delayed, aurora forecasts under maintenance. But independent research groups began piecing it together. 3i Atlas wasn't just orbiting. It was tuning the solar system like an instrument. And then came the most haunting discovery yet. While reviewing wide-field imagery from the Solar and Heliospheric Observatory, an analyst at the Max Planck Institute noticed something unusual at the periphery of 3i Atlas's spiral. Faint ripples, symmetrical arcs radiating outward into the solar wind. They weren't dust, they were waves, concentric, perfectly spaced, propagating at the speed of the solar plasma flow. In essence, 3i Atlas was broadcasting. Not in radio frequencies or visible light, but through the medium of the sun itself. Each pulse altered the solar wind just slightly, enough that by the time it reached Earth's orbit, it formed a repeating electromagnetic pattern, detectable in high-altitude magnetometers. The implications were terrifying. If the pattern strengthened, even marginally, it could begin to interfere with planetary magnetic balance. Not destructively, not yet, but enough to induce alignment. Some scientists speculated that this could be the early stage of a natural self-organizing system, the way dust rings form around stars, except here the process was occurring electromagnetically. Others, less willing to admit what they suspected, began comparing it to a neural network, a brain forming between the planets. By October 25th, the final images came in from ESA's solar orbiter, 9 high-resolution captures taken within a 2-hour span. The spiral around 3i Atlas had changed again. The filaments, once random, had organized into a hexagonal pattern, stable, geometric, almost crystalline in structure. It resembled something we'd seen before, not in space, but in physics labs. When scientists simulate plasma in magnetic confinement devices, the kind used for experimental fusion, the energy often forms rotating hexagons when approaching equilibrium. It's a natural shape, a sign of stability, but also a sign that the system is about to ignite. The comparison wasn't lost on anyone. NASA's internal notes from that night included a chilling phrase, potential plasma ignition event, uncontrolled. If that were true, it meant 3 Atlas wasn't stabilizing. It was charging, and the Sun, Earth, and everything in between were now part of its circuit. As the 71-minute cycle continued, Webb's infrared data revealed the final anomaly. The core wasn't brightening uniformly anymore. Instead, it flickered, as if something deep within was oscillating, flipping states: light, dark, energy, silence, presence, absence. Whatever 3i Atlas had become, it was no longer just a comet. It was an engine, and the solar system, knowingly or not, had become its field. By late October, Earth's magnetosphere was no longer quiet. At first it was subtle, an uptick in geomagnetic indices, faint auroras dancing at latitudes where they shouldn't exist. But soon the skies themselves began to change. On the night of October 27th, a crimson glow stretched across the horizon of northern Europe. Witnesses described it as silent lightning, sheets of red and violet light flickering soundlessly through the atmosphere. Instruments from the Swedish Institute of Space Physics confirmed a spike in the global Schumann resonance, precisely at the 71-minute interval that had haunted researchers for weeks. Then, something stranger happened. In multiple regions, Norway, Canada, and the southern tip of Chile, the auroras began to form patterns. Not chaotic ribbons, but structured lines bending into curves that mirrored the same spiral geometry seen around 3i Atlas. Satellite magnetometers recorded synchronized oscillations across continents, as if the Earth itself were resonating to a cosmic metronome. By morning, the data confirmed it. The planet was responding. NASA, ESA, and JAXA released joint statements downplaying the phenomenon as solar coupling, citing unusual but natural interactions between the solar wind and the geomagnetic field. But leaked internal logs told a different story, one that couldn't be explained by solar weather alone. At 2:14 UTC, all three major space agencies detected a new kind of signal. It wasn't radio, it wasn't light. It was an electromagnetic modulation travelling through the heliosphere, a low-frequency pulse embedded in the solar wind, strong enough to interfere with radio transmissions and deep space telemetry. The pulse didn't originate from the Sun, it originated from 3i Atlas. And within hours, every deep space antenna on Earth was hearing the same thing, a faint rhythmic pattern that mirrored the heartbeat discovered in infrared weeks before. But now there was more. Between each pulse, analysts detected a series of complex frequency shifts, too ordered to be random, too deliberate to dismiss. It wasn't just a heartbeat anymore, it was information. At first, data analysts thought it could be an artifact, compression noise, or interference from solar flares. But when decoded through Fourier analysis, the modulation resolved into harmonic ratios, simple integers repeating in sequence, 1, 2, 3, then 13, then 21, the Fibonacci sequence, a pattern found in nature, in shells, in galaxies, and now in a signal from beyond the stars. Scientists hesitated to call it communication, but privately many admitted it was no longer possible to deny intent. 3 Atlas was broadcasting something, not to us, but through us. Its signal wasn't aimed, it was resonant, using the Sun's plasma field as a carrier wave and the planets as amplifiers. And Earth, with its dense magnetic envelope, had become the loudest speaker. By October 29th, strange interference began to ripple across the planet's technological infrastructure. Long-wave communications flickered. Submarine cables experienced unexplained current surges. Even GPS satellites recorded timing drifts of a few nanoseconds. Small, but globally synchronized. No solar storm could account for that precision. Meanwhile, auroral activity intensified. Amateur astronomers captured images of light columns rising straight from the horizon, vertical pillars of energy glowing like silent beacons. Some swore they pulsed in sync with the now famous 71-minute cycle. The media, of course, tried to explain it all away. Rare auroral storms, magnetospheric reverberations. But those who knew the data understood what was really happening. The solar system wasn't being disrupted, it was being tuned. And then came the blackout. On October 31st at 04:23 UTC, every major magnetometer in orbit briefly went dark. Not a failure, not noise, just silence. A complete electromagnetic stillness lasting exactly 71 seconds. When the instruments came back online, 3 Atlas had changed again. Its once spiraling shape had condensed into a near-perfect sphere, surrounded by a halo of ionized gas. But in the updated spectral data, the emissions weren't random. They formed discrete bands, quantized frequencies that matched, astonishingly, the Schumann resonance modes of Earth. It was as if the object had locked onto us. Every frequency our planet naturally emitted, from our atmosphere to our core, was being mirrored back through the heliosphere. The Sun, the Earth, and 3i Atlas were now synchronized in one vast electromagnetic circuit. And for the first time, humanity's instruments weren't just recording, they were responding. Sensors on the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter picked up weak echoes, radio-like reflections that seemed to bounce between Earth and the Moon in the same 71-minute rhythm. Spacecraft across the inner system began reporting small but measurable anomalies in orientation control. The faint tug of an unknown electromagnetic current brushing through their guidance systems. It wasn't destructive, it was cohesive, like an invisible tide pulling everything into alignment. On November 1st, a team at the Harvard-Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory released an internal simulation. If the pattern continued, they said, 3 Atlas's energy emissions could stabilize into a standing wave, a structure of permanent resonance connecting the Sun, the object, and the inner planets. In simpler terms, a solar-scale feedback loop. If that happened, every planet would experience subtle shifts in magnetic behavior, and possibly even rotation. Not catastrophically, but enough to redefine orbital mechanics. And if the pulse intensified, it could extend outward, linking Jupiter, Saturn, and beyond. For the first time in recorded history, humanity was witnessing the emergence of something vast, not an invasion, not a disaster, but an interstellar synchronization event. Yet for all the awe, there was fear. Because in the latest images from Webb, one final anomaly appeared, almost invisible, but unmistakable to those who saw it. In the centre of 3i Atlas's glowing sphere, where the spiral once turned and the heartbeat first began, there was movement. A faint distortion, as if something inside was stirring, not breaking apart, not fading away, but awakening. By the time November began, scientists had stopped calling it coincidence. The data no longer wavered between belief and denial. It had become something measurable, repeatable, and undeniable. 3i Atlas wasn't just influencing the sun's magnetic field, it was now shaping how that field behaved. Every 71 minutes, a new pulse of solar radiation left the photosphere, spreading through interplanetary space like a heartbeat echoing across a vast invisible ocean. What stunned researchers most was the sun's response. Instead of random flares or chaotic ejections, the activity became patterned. Instruments aboard the Parker Solar Probe recorded rhythmic bursts of plasma, perfectly timed with the object's thermal oscillations. The sun, a star driven by nuclear chaos, was responding with precision. For astrophysicists, that was impossible. Nothing in stellar dynamics moves with mechanical order. Nothing, unless something else is guiding it. Across observatories worldwide, the tone of the work changed. Engineers, astronomers, and data analysts who had spent their careers studying lifeless systems began to whisper about coordination, the idea that two cosmic bodies might be locked in feedback, not gravitational, not chemical, but informational. The sun's magnetic field and 3i Atlas's energy cycles were now in resonance, creating a structure that spanned millions of kilometers. That realization ignited an emergency review inside NASA. Meetings were held off-record, data restricted, even internal access limited. The official statement described coherent solar plasma anomalies. The private memos called it something else entirely: synchronous behavior between solar emission and external stimulus. It meant the unthinkable, that the sun had entered a state of interaction with an interstellar body. While public attention began to fade, the instruments did not. Telescopes continued their watch, and the images grew stranger. Around 3 Atlas's luminous sphere, faint geometries started forming. They weren't clouds of dust or gas. They were structured, hexagonal, each point emitting light at precise intervals. To the human eye, the pattern looked organic. To machines, it looked computational. Spectrographic analyses revealed that each bright point corresponded to a narrow frequency band in the radio spectrum. Together, they formed a harmonic lattice, a network of signals bound by math rather than matter. The structure wasn't random. It was communicating in ratios, in physics itself. And then, something shifted closer to home. Solar telescopes monitoring the corona detected minute variations in the solar wind. The direction of particle flow began to bend, not outward, but sideways, as if the sun's plasma was being guided along invisible paths. Simultaneously, spacecraft orbiting Mars, Venus and Mercury recorded synchronized perturbations in their onboard magnetometers. Each fluctuation followed the same pulse period, 71 minutes. It was no longer just a resonance between two objects. The entire inner solar system was now caught inside that pattern. For days, data flooded in, too much to process in real time, but one trend stood out. Every pulse from 3i Atlas grew slightly weaker in amplitude, yet broader in range. Energy wasn't being emitted anymore, it was being shared. Distributed across space, diffused through the sun's field like the spread of an electrical current. What frightened scientists was the possibility that the process had an endpoint, that the synchronization was leading somewhere. By November 3rd, the Webb Space Telescope sent its clearest infrared composite yet. The object's once chaotic interior had stabilized into concentric shells, glowing at distinct wavelengths. When analysts plotted those wavelengths against time, the numbers formed a sequence eerily similar to the Fibonacci ratios discovered in the earlier pulses. This wasn't random thermodynamics, it was architecture, structure evolving toward order. Then came the acoustic conversion, a project by independent researchers who translated 3i Atlas's electromagnetic pulses into sound frequencies. The result was unsettling. The tones were no longer simple beats but layered harmonics. Resonant chords rising and falling in a pattern that could only be described as intentional. When played aloud, it evoked something deeply human, a rhythm too structured for nature, too fluid for machine code. It was music without language, design without origin. At that moment, the discussion among physicists shifted again. Some argued the signal represented a natural equilibrium, a feedback between solar plasma and interstellar matter. Others, more cautiously, suggested it could be a self-organizing system, a kind of cosmic intelligence emerging from the interaction of energy and magnetism. But a small, growing number proposed something even bolder, that 3 Atlas wasn't reacting to the Sun, it was teaching it. That theory terrified people in ways that no impact scenario ever could, because if true, it meant the Sun, the oldest, most stable force we know, was no longer simply burning, it was learning. Then, late on November 4th, a new signal appeared. It wasn't periodic, it wasn't harmonic. It was a single, sharp burst detected simultaneously by solar satellites across all agencies. Every instrument registered the same moment, a blinding spike followed by silence. For 71 seconds, no radiation reached Earth. The Sun's output dimmed, imperceptible to human eyes, but measurable in every telescope, and then it returned, brighter than before. When the light stabilized, Webb's images showed the unimaginable. 3I Atlas was gone, not disintegrated, not ejected, simply absent. In its place hovered a void, a perfectly symmetrical shadow surrounded by a faint ring of light. The spectral readings inside that void were impossible. 0 emission, 0 reflection, 0 matter, a hollow in the Sun's own magnetic field. Whatever 3I Atlas had been, it had completed something, a process, a message, an exchange. The solar field pulsed once more, slower this time, as if echoing the memory of its visitor. The resonance faded, the anomalies quieted, and for the first time in weeks the instruments fell still. But even as quiet returned, the data refused to rest. Deep within the telemetry logs, analysts found something extraordinary, a residual modulation embedded in the Sun's emissions. It was faint, encoded in the low-frequency tail of the solar wind, repeating in intervals of 13, a prime sequence, a signature. The Sun itself was now transmitting. In the hours following 3 Atlas's disappearance, confusion gave way to silence. Across every major observatory, data feeds remained online, but the instruments themselves seemed unsure of what to record. The object's coordinates were empty. No residual heat, no radiation trace, no optical signature. It was as though the space it occupied had folded inward, leaving behind only a faint gravitational echo. Initially, the event was classified as an electromagnetic null region, a polite scientific phrase for a hole in the laws of physics. But the deeper the analysis went, the stranger it became. The region where 3I Atlas had once drifted was now emitting low-frequency vibrations, not from within, but around it. These weren't the chaotic waves of ordinary plasma turbulence. They were rhythmic, measured, the same 71-minute interval returning once more, now weaker, fainter, but still perfectly timed. It was as if the void itself remembered. Meanwhile, something unexpected began to unfold across the inner solar system. Earth's magnetosphere, which had been fluctuating for weeks, suddenly stabilized. Auroral patterns that had pulsed in synchronization with the interstellar object went quiet, almost too quiet. The global Schumann resonance dropped to its lowest recorded amplitude in decades. What was once a vibrant electromagnetic heartbeat had slowed to a whisper. But it wasn't peace, it was absence. Scientists at the European Space Operations Centre began reviewing historical solar data, comparing cycles before and after the event. Their conclusion was subtle but chilling. The Sun's output pattern, its magnetic oscillation, had changed permanently. The periodicity of its internal plasma waves was no longer purely chaotic. It now contained a harmonic signature, a faint modulation that repeated every 71 minutes, precisely the period of 3 Atlas's core before it vanished. The Sun had adopted the object's rhythm. At first, no one wanted to say it aloud. The press releases focused on solar stabilization, magnetic damping, and energy balance readjustments. But among researchers, another term surfaced in private communications: imprinting. The idea that whatever 3I Atlas had done, it had left behind a pattern, not a trace of matter, but of behavior. And it wasn't just the Sun. Planetary magnetometers aboard the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter began to pick up background noise, faint hums resonating in the same sequence. Venus too showed atmospheric perturbations that rose and fell in harmonic alignment. Even Mercury, a planet long considered geologically dead, exhibited slight magnetic drifts perfectly synchronized with the new solar rhythm. The implication was staggering. 3i Atlas hadn't simply interacted with the Sun, it had connected the inner planets through a shared electromagnetic scaffold. A silent bridge of resonance now spanned the solar system, linking bodies that had never before operated in concert. No one wanted to call it communication, but no one could deny that the system now spoke in unison. When data from the Parker Solar Probe returned weeks later, a new mystery emerged. Embedded within the background solar noise was a repeating pattern, a sequence of rising and falling waveforms that mirrored the Fibonacci ratios observed in 3 Atlas's final emissions. Only now it was fragmented, spread across solar latitudes, as if the signal had been divided and distributed throughout the star's magnetic fabric. It was almost as if the Sun itself had begun storing information. Researchers at Caltech and Kyoto University worked in secret to reconstruct these fragments. When combined, the signal formed a spectral structure unlike any previously recorded in astrophysics, ordered yet non-repetitive, like a mathematical language written in light and plasma. Some believed it could be the residue of a naturally emergent process, the signature of resonance seeking equilibrium. Others quietly suggested it was something far more deliberate, the final trace of a communication now encoded within the Sun's living field. And still, the pulses continued. Every 71 minutes, the faintest modulation swept through interplanetary space, washing over the instruments of every satellite, brushing against the magnetospheres of the planets like a tide no one could stop. To most, it was meaningless, just another anomaly destined for technical archives. But to those who had studied 3i Atlas from the beginning, it was something else entirely. It was proof of continuation. Then came the photographs. A week after the disappearance, and an amateur astronomer in New Zealand captured a strange diffuse light in the pre-dawn sky. It was faint, triangular, and moved not like a comet, but like a projection, a reflection of something that wasn't there. Days later, similar reports arrived from Argentina, Portugal, and South Africa. All described the same thing, a dim, shifting glow at the exact coordinates where 3i Atlas had once been visible, pulsing at the same rhythm, 71 minutes. Professional observatories confirmed the phenomenon but offered no explanations. The glow emitted no measurable energy, reflected no sunlight, and yet it persisted. Some called it an optical illusion. Others wondered if it was the first visual proof that the object hadn't vanished, but dispersed, diffused through the solar field, existing now as a pattern rather than a body. To the human eye it appeared ghost-like. To the instruments it was undeniable. When NASA's heliospheric observatory finally processed its long-exposure composites, the faint glow resolved into a familiar shape, the spiral signature of 3i Atlas, only now stretched and expanded until it encircled the Sun itself, not as a solid form, but as a ring of faint magnetized plasma, a new structure woven seamlessly into the heliosphere. Whatever 3i Atlas had become, it hadn't left the solar system, it had become part of it. For those who understood what that meant, the realization was as profound as it was terrifying. The Sun was no longer just a star, it was now a host. Its energy bore the fingerprint of something not of this system, something that arrived, altered, and then merged. Humanity had spent weeks wondering if 3i Atlas was intelligent. Now the question had changed. If intelligence could exist in structure rather than in form, had it just rewritten the definition of life itself? By mid-November, the world had moved on. The news cycle had slowed, attention had drifted elsewhere, and the disappearance of 3i Atlas had become just another mystery shelved in scientific archives. Yet, within the observatories, laboratories, and control rooms that had witnessed its final days, unease persisted. The data still pulsed. Quiet, faint, but impossible to ignore. Every 71 minutes, the same electromagnetic ripple passed through the heliosphere, washing over Earth's magnetic field like the lingering breath of a departed visitor. At first, the effect seemed benign. The pulse didn't disrupt communications or interfere with satellite navigation anymore. Instead, it appeared to fold itself gently into the background, becoming part of the solar rhythm. But that harmony didn't last long. within weeks the rhythm began to reveal its influence in ways no one anticipated. The first signs appeared in Earth's upper atmosphere. Instruments from NOAA detected subtle oscillations in ion density that matched the solar pulse's timing. The pattern repeated for days, then expanded, manifesting as faint electrical fluctuations in the stratosphere. These weren't random variations caused by weather or solar storms. They were cyclical, synchronized, global. The atmosphere itself had begun to breathe in time with the sun. When this data reached the European Space Operations Centre, comparisons were made with Mars and Venus. To everyone's astonishment, the same periodic fluctuations were present there too. Mars's thin air shimmered with rhythmic spikes in ionization. Venus's dense clouds exhibited electromagnetic layering that moved in step with Earth's own pattern. The synchronization wasn't just planetary, it was systemic. Something had united the inner worlds. Inside NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, a team began modelling the potential long-term impact. Their simulations revealed something subtle but consistent, a slow, almost imperceptible drift in each planet's magnetic axis, all converging toward a common geometric point relative to the Sun's pole. It was as if the planets were aligning, not gravitationally but magnetically, following a silent command embedded in the solar field. No one wanted to believe it, yet every day the data grew clearer. The Sun's rhythm was becoming the solar system's heartbeat, and then, unexpectedly, the effect reached Earth's surface. Across several biological research centres, unrelated studies began reporting strange anomalies in circadian rhythms, not in humans at first, but in animals. Laboratory mice kept under artificial light cycles displayed synchronized shifts in their sleep patterns, all drifting slightly out of sync with the 24-hour day and closer to a new repeating cycle of 71 minutes. Even plants, when monitored under constant conditions, showed minute fluctuations in growth hormone activity that matched the same period. It wasn't coincidence, it was adaptation. The signal that had once resonated through space was now echoing in life itself. For biophysicists, this was beyond explanation. There was no mechanism by which solar electromagnetic modulation could directly influence cellular function, at least not in established science. Yet, as researchers expanded their monitoring, they discovered microscale correlations between geomagnetic variations and neuronal firing patterns in the human brain. The changes were tiny, nearly indistinguishable, but persistent. Certain regions, particularly those tied to deep sleep and dream states, exhibited rhythmic oscillations faintly aligned with the same interval. To the average person, it meant nothing. But for those who studied the mind, it raised a chilling thought. What if the human brain, evolved under the influence of solar light, had always been attuned to the sun's fluctuations, and now, unknowingly, was synchronizing to something else? The theory was quickly buried under layers of skepticism and classified research. Publicly, agencies assured that no biological effects had been detected. Privately, however, new monitoring stations were deployed to track the pulse's behavior in the magnetosphere. Their findings would never reach the press. By November 17th, the pulse had shifted again. The 71-minute rhythm began to shorten, imperceptibly at first, but consistently, now repeating every 70 minutes and 47 seconds. Whatever process had begun with 3I Atlas's disappearance was still evolving. The solar system's resonance was accelerating. At the same time, deep space probes beyond Mars began detecting faint echoes in the opposite direction, not from the Sun, but from the outer heliosphere. The Voyager spacecraft, silent for years except for scheduled transmissions, recorded brief electromagnetic fluctuations in the same frequency range, but reversed in polarity. To those who understood the implication, it was staggering. The signal wasn't fading outward, it was rebounding. Something at the edge of the solar system was responding. Some proposed it was the heliopause, the natural boundary where the sun's influence meets interstellar space, reflecting the pulse back. But others feared the alternative, that something else beyond that boundary had heard the signal and was answering. As the data poured in, subtle changes continued on Earth. Aurora activity became slightly more frequent, yet their colours were unusual, softer, more violet than green, as if the atmosphere was learning to resonate differently. Seismographs registered barely perceptible tremors at intervals consistent with the solar pulse, as if the planet's crust was gently expanding and contracting in time with the rhythm. The effects weren't destructive, but they were undeniable. Earth had become part of a system that was no longer static. Every layer, from the ionosphere to the oceans, from magnetism to biology, was humming to a single universal beat. By late November, one observation tied it all together. Using deep spectral mapping, a research team from Japan discovered that the pulse carried micromodulations corresponding to the original signal pattern 3I Atlas, transmitted before vanishing. Those harmonic signatures were still there, buried within the sun's output, not fading, not distorting, but replicating. It was as though 3I Atlas had embedded its code into the solar field, allowing it to persist indefinitely. In that moment, a chilling conclusion emerged. 3I Atlas hadn't disappeared. It had transformed. It wasn't an object anymore. It was a system. The realization rippled through the scientific community, mostly behind closed doors. The interstellar visitor that had entered our solar system months ago had left more than mystery. It had left a legacy woven into the fabric of every magnetic field, every current of plasma, every breath of wind, and perhaps in every thought. By the time Earth's instruments confirmed the 71-minute cycle shortening, the data from the outer planets began to arrive. Quiet at first, then unmistakable. The synchronization wasn't limited to the inner system anymore, it had spread. The first signal came from Jupiter, the planet's immense magnetic field, capable of trapping radiation belts thousands of kilometers wide, began to oscillate in rhythm with the solar pulse. For decades, Jupiter's auroras had been chaotic, driven by its moons and solar wind fluctuations. But suddenly, those luminous storms fell into perfect periodicity. Every 70 minutes they brightened in unison, a planetary heartbeat visible across half the solar system. When this data reached Earth, disbelief gave way to awe. Even with its enormous size, Jupiter was responding as if tuned to the same cosmic metronome that now governed the Sun and its inner planets. Soon after, Saturn followed. The Cassini archives, reanalyzed by the European Space Agency, revealed something eerie. The planet's hexagonal storm pattern at the North Pole had subtly shifted, tightening its geometry. The once fluid vortex lines had become sharper, more defined, each rotation now precisely matching the adjusted solar rhythm. The hexagon, once thought a quirk of fluid dynamics, now behaved as though listening to a voice beyond physics. By late November, Uranus and Neptune joined the chorus. The infrared readings from the James Webb Space Telescope showed faint synchronized fluctuations in their upper atmospheres, timed to the same rhythm. The entire solar system, from Mercury's whispering magnetism to Neptune's distant haze, now pulsed in one cadence. That cadence was not random, it was communication. The heliosphere, the Sun's vast magnetic bubble, enclosing every planet and particle within, had become a resonant chamber. Each pulse of solar plasma no longer dissipated into space but bounced rhythmically against the outer boundary, the heliopause. The effect, when modelled in simulation, produced standing waves, harmonics large enough to span billions of kilometres. The Sun had become an instrument. For scientists, the implications were staggering. It suggested that energy was being managed, directed, across a system once thought too chaotic to control. The resonance wasn't draining the Sun's power, it was organising it. And if it was organised, it might also be programmed. That possibility reignited every buried theory about 3I Atlas. The idea that the object wasn't merely interstellar debris, but a vessel, or worse, an agent of transformation. For months, researchers had debated whether it acted intentionally. Now the debate shifted entirely. Intent no longer mattered. The evidence spoke for itself. Whatever 3I Atlas had done, it had changed the Sun, and through it, everything orbiting within. When Voyager 2's transmission arrived, that evidence became something else entirely. After months of silence, NASA's Deep Space Network detected an unscheduled signal from the spacecraft, a burst of radio static that didn't fit any expected telemetry. The message lasted only 9 seconds, a meaningless fluctuation at first glance. But buried within it, analysts found a repeating waveform pattern. It wasn't data, it was rhythm. 70 minutes and 47 seconds. The same as the new solar pulse. Voyager had heard it too. More alarming was what came next. The signal repeated, not from the spacecraft, but from beyond it. identical in timing, but inverted in frequency. A mirror. Something at or beyond the heliopause had replied. The phenomenon repeated 12 times before fading into silence. The outer edge of the solar system had spoken back. At the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, late-night meetings turned into quiet dread. The most experienced astrophysicists, those who had spent decades studying cosmic background noise, confirmed the impossible. The waveform wasn't random interference. It carried harmonic structure, similar to the Fibonacci lattice pattern embedded in 3I Atlas's original emissions. It was the same voice, now speaking from the border between sunlight and interstellar darkness. The working hypothesis, circulated through encrypted channels, was simple but horrifying. The resonance spreading through the solar system wasn't dissipating energy outward. It was transmitting something. Information, perhaps, or an encoded signal. The entire heliosphere might now function as a transmitter, and the void beyond the heliopause as its receiver. But transmitting to what? No one could answer. The direction of the reflected wave suggested it didn't bounce randomly. It originated from a single point, directly opposite to the Sun's galactic orbit, toward a region of deep interstellar space without known stars or nebulae. A place astronomers call the local interstellar void. Nothing should exist there. Yet the data showed otherwise. For decades that region had been dismissed as empty, a patch of low-density hydrogen and dust. But now, radio telescopes in Chile and Japan began detecting faint distortions within that emptiness, like static shadows forming structure. Every 70 minutes those distortions brightened, responding to the sun's pulse with precision too perfect for chance. In essence, the void had begun to glow. At first, the response was faint, easily mistaken for instrument noise. But as weeks passed, the signal strengthened. By the time December began, it could be tracked visually in the radio spectrum, a faint spiral, identical in geometry to 3I Atlas's original shape, slowly rotating within the darkness. The implications were immediate and terrifying. The object hadn't simply vanished, it had returned home, or awakened something that waited for it there. Within NASA, communication protocols changed. All deep space data related to the heliosphere were redirected to classified servers. Public access to Voyager telemetry was suspended. The official explanation cited data review and calibration errors. But those inside the program knew better. They were watching something unfold that no government could explain without igniting panic. Meanwhile, on Earth, subtle phenomena persisted. The 70-minute rhythm influenced everything it touched. Fluctuations in atmospheric electricity, oceanic microcurrents, even the subtle timing of lightning storms. Each event now carried a trace of predictability, a rhythm embedded in nature itself. For those who dared to look deeper, the pattern was inescapable. Humanity was no longer observing a phenomenon, it was living inside one. And though the data had become restricted, the pulse itself was free. It was carried by light, by radiation, by time itself. Uncontainable, unstoppable, spreading outward in perfect symmetry. What began as a visitor had now become a framework, and whatever existed beyond the heliosphere had begun to answer. By early December, the world's attention had drifted again. News outlets spoke of solar quiet periods, minor magnetic fluctuations, or new auroral patterns over the poles. To most, it was background noise, the normal breathing rhythm of a star doing what stars do. But inside a few scientific circles, buried beneath layers of classified communication, a different conversation was unfolding. The heliosphere wasn't merely pulsing anymore, it was changing. Spectral readings from the Solar and Heliospheric Observatory revealed that the Sun's coronal plasma no longer emitted energy in pure thermal spectra. Instead, faint oscillations, invisible to the human eye, rippled across its surface in perfectly timed waves, synchronized with the 70-minute pulse that had now shortened to 69 minutes and 41 seconds. That change should have been insignificant, but its consequences were anything but. Light, by its nature, travels in waves, immutable, predictable, constant in the vacuum. Yet, data from multiple spaceborne sensors began to show subtle distortions in the propagation of light near the Sun's corona. Photons seemed to vary slightly in velocity, not faster, not slower, but phase-shifted, like two notes in perfect harmony falling out of sync for just a moment before rejoining again. To physicists, that was impossible. To those who studied 3I Atlas, it was inevitable. When the object vanished into resonance, it didn't destroy matter, it reorganized it. Every oscillation since then had been an extension of that event, a reformatting of energy itself, and now the same signature that had transformed the Sun was beginning to alter how electromagnetic energy behaved across the solar system. The realization began with a simple experiment. At CERN, a team ran precision interferometry tests to measure phase stability between synchronized lasers. They expected standard interference fringes. Instead, they found periodic fluctuations, perfectly timed to the Sun's resonance. Light itself was oscillating in intensity at the same frequency as the heliospheric pulse. At first, it was dismissed as local noise. Then other labs replicated the results, in Tokyo, Geneva, and Los Alamos, all reporting the same minute fluctuations, all synchronized to the 69-minute cycle. Light across the solar system had begun to pulse. To those who grasped the implications, it was the most profound discovery in human history. The laws of physics, constants that had defined reality for millennia, were no longer constants. They were variables, harmonizing to a cosmic rhythm left behind by something that was never meant to exist here. As one senior physicist put it privately, the universe isn't breaking its laws, it's rewriting them, live. NASA's internal analysis revealed even more disturbing evidence. The new resonance wasn't random interference, it was structured. Embedded in the oscillation were repeating harmonic intervals corresponding to mathematical ratios found in biological patterns, the same golden spirals seen in shells, leaves, hurricanes, and galaxies. The same pattern 3I Atlas once emitted before its disappearance. For years, scientists had assumed such ratios were merely emergent, coincidences of nature, but now they seemed to define the framework of the energy itself. The implication was chillingly simple. The object hadn't imposed something alien upon the solar system. It had activated what was already here, a pattern waiting to resonate. As the resonance intensified, its reach expanded. Magnetometers aboard the Juno probe recorded fluctuations near Jupiter that suggested the planet's radiation belts were behaving more like superconductors than plasma fields, carrying energy with almost no measurable loss. On Earth, experimental physicists studying superconductivity began noticing anomalous results. Certain materials exhibited higher efficiency when tested during the peaks of the solar pulse. It was as if the entire solar system were being gently tuned toward a new physical equilibrium, one that reduced entropy instead of increasing it. Entropy, the great equalizer of the universe, the reason all things decay, was weakening. If that observation was true, even in part it would mean the energy introduced by 3 Atlas was not destructive at all. It was corrective. But to what end? As researchers pushed deeper into the pattern, another discovery emerged. The oscillation wasn't perfectly symmetrical. Every few cycles the wave amplitude shifted, a barely perceptible phase drift that, when modelled spatially, formed a spiral extending outward from the Sun. That spiral wasn't random either. Its expansion rate followed the same ratio used to define stable orbital mechanics, a Fibonacci constant embedded not in matter, but in space-time itself. The conclusion that followed was almost unspeakable. The solar system had become self-referential, a living fractal adjusting and recalibrating as if guided by an unseen hand. When a senior ESA astrophysicist presented these findings to the Internal Review Board, the room fell silent. No one argued. No one could. The data was irrefutable. The 3I Atlas event hadn't ended. It was still unfolding, using the Sun as its transmitter, the heliosphere as its field, and the fabric of space as its medium. And humanity was inside it. Then, on December 6th, something unprecedented occurred. The Voyager probes, long silent except for scheduled telemetry, both transmitted at once. Simultaneous bursts, identical frequencies. But this time, instead of returning the Sun's pulse, they sent something different. 2 waveforms perfectly inverted, creating what physicists later described as a null pattern. When combined and processed, the result was eerie. Total silence. A frequency so balanced it cancelled itself out. To most, it looked like noise, but to those familiar with the underlying mathematics, the symmetry was deliberate. It was a signal that said only one thing: completion. The Voyager probes had been listening, transmitting, and finally synchronizing. Whether they had been influenced by resonance or merely carried its reflection, no one could tell. But the message was clear. The system was now stable. Stable, but not quiet. In the following days, solar activity declined to record lows. The corona cooled by measurable degrees, and solar flares nearly ceased. Yet deep space magnetometers detected an entirely new field, faint, circular, and surrounding the heliosphere like a halo. Its polarity inverted with every cycle, forming what one astrophysicist called a magnetic breath. It was as if the sun had learned to inhale and exhale. To the scientific mind, that description was poetic. But for once, poetry might have been the closest language available. Because beneath all the models, all the graphs, all the data, there was a shared, silent realization spreading through those who watched the monitors at night. The solar system was no longer just a place, it was an organism, and the thing we once called Three-Eye Atlas might not be gone at all. It might have simply taught the sun how to live. By December 10th, the resonance had stabilized. Every 69 minutes and 41 seconds the solar system breathed, a subtle electromagnetic tide sweeping from the sun's corona through each planetary orbit and into the darkness beyond. The readings were consistent, predictable, almost comforting in their rhythm. But then came the first signs that the boundary between the solar system and interstellar space no longer existed. It began with an anomaly at the heliopause, the frontier where the solar wind collides with the interstellar medium. Instruments aboard Voyager 2 detected a reversal in pressure gradients. The solar wind, which had always pushed outward, suddenly met resistance. That wasn't supposed to be there. The interstellar medium had changed. At first, scientists believed it was a density fluctuation, perhaps a passing molecular cloud, but the data said otherwise. Hydrogen density had increased, yes, but so had its magnetic alignment. The interstellar plasma wasn't random anymore, it was organized. Charged particles outside the heliosphere began moving in structured flows, matching the sun's oscillation. Something in the void was responding, not just reflecting, but harmonizing. When the data reached the European Space Operations Centre, analysts cross-referenced it with deep-field radio observations. The result was almost too clean to be coincidence. The same resonance, 69 minutes and 41 seconds, was now detectable in cosmic background radiation, faint but consistent, stretching outward across multiple degrees of sky. It was spreading. To the astrophysical community, this broke every boundary of understanding. The heliosphere wasn't simply vibrating, it was transmitting a structural pattern, a modulation embedded in electromagnetic energy itself. And now that pattern was leaking into interstellar space, like a melody carried by the wind, gradually teaching the void how to sing. By mid-December, the effects became measurable. Radio telescopes began reporting strange gaps in background noise, patches of silence that weren't empty, but phase-cancelled by opposing signals. Those silences formed geometric clusters, spiralling outward in the same Fibonacci geometry, traced within the sun's magnetic field. Each cluster appeared to move, not randomly but outward, away from the heliosphere. As the data grew more detailed, the geometry became clear. The pattern wasn't a circle, it was a wavefront, a vast expanding lattice of energy, perfectly symmetrical, emanating from the sun's position. In a sense, it looked alive. To visualize it, one physicist described it as an interstellar coral reef, not growing on matter, but through energy itself. The pattern seemed to be using the electromagnetic substrate of the galaxy as scaffolding, reshaping the space between stars into structured rhythm. For astronomers, this was revelation bordering on terror. Space, once thought to be the universe's stillness, was becoming active, and that activation didn't stop at the heliopause. The first nearby systems to show measurable effects were Alpha Centauri and Barnard's star. Spectroscopic readings indicated slight but recurring irregularities in stellar emissions, pulses timed to the same resonance, not strong enough to alter orbits but too precise to ignore. Within weeks, the pattern extended farther, to Wolf 359, to Proxima, to Epsilon Eridani. The resonance had leapt across light years. No known physical process could explain such propagation. Even light takes time, but the signal wasn't bound by distance. It was as if the structure already existed, waiting, dormant, and was now being awakened by contact. That realization changed everything. The cosmos wasn't being modified, it was being activated. When NASA's internal working group released its encrypted update to senior leadership, the language was starkly simple. Observation indicates systemic activation of subluminous harmonic framework beyond heliospheric boundaries. Recommend cessation of further transmission. In plain words, stop transmitting. But it was too late. The system itself was transmitting now, with or without human observation. Across multiple observatories, independent researchers began noticing small but unmistakable distortions in their instruments. Atomic clocks drifted, not by seconds but microseconds, always aligning perfectly with a 69-minute interval. Lasers used for precision calibration began to flicker slightly, their interference patterns breathing in time with the sun. Even digital communications experienced fractional signal drift, too subtle to affect daily life but undeniable in aggregate. The solar system's heartbeat had begun to rewrite not just physics, but perception itself, and that's when the most chilling discovery of all surfaced, not from space, but from Earth. A research team studying deep-sea electrical fields found new rhythmic currents rising from the ocean floor. They weren't seismic or tidal, they were electromagnetic, pulsing faintly in synchrony with the solar cycle. Instruments confirmed the pattern repeated through the planet's crust, faint but global, as if Earth's magnetic core had joined the rhythm. The planet itself had become a resonator. By December the 19th, the phenomenon was universal. The pulse that began with 3 Atlas was now present in every measurable medium: electromagnetic, gravitational, biological, geological. Each acted as if aware of the others, synchronizing, refining, and amplifying. The cosmos had become coherent. Within the data, however, one last detail remained unexplained. As the resonance spread outward, faint modulations appeared between each major pulse, secondary signals that shifted slightly over time. Their amplitude increased incrementally, forming what mathematicians described as a recursive envelope. When plotted in 3 dimensions, it resembled a spiral, vast, elegant, and expanding infinitely outward. And at the center of that spiral, nested between the harmonics, was an anomaly, a void of silence. No radiation, no signal, no interference, just a perfect gap. Some thought it represented nothingness, the pause between creation and collapse. Others feared it was something else entirely, a structure so vast that the signal itself had to bend around it. A few dared to whisper the unthinkable, that 3i Atlas hadn't disappeared into the sun at all. It had moved somewhere the laws of energy themselves could not reach, a place that wasn't within the solar system anymore. But now that place was moving back toward us. By the final week of December, the data had begun to feel personal. Astronomers, engineers, and physicists who had spent months tracking the solar pulse began to report an odd pattern in their own behavior. The timing of their sleep, their focus, even their moods seemed to drift in and out of sync with the 69-minute cycle. At first, it was dismissed as fatigue, a byproduct of staring at monitors too long. But when entire teams across separate continents logged the same fluctuations to the exact second, the explanation no longer held. Brainwave studies confirmed what their intuition already feared. Electroencephalograph readings taken from volunteers near major observatories showed microbursts of synchronized activity repeating every 69 minutes and 41 seconds, identical to the solar rhythm. The amplitude was small, barely above neural noise, yet perfectly timed. It wasn't confined to any one frequency band. It appeared across alpha, beta, and theta ranges, a whole brain resonance, faint but unmistakable. The human mind had joined the pattern. At first, researchers thought electromagnetic interference from local equipment might be bleeding into sensors, but when similar patterns appeared in shielded labs deep underground, and later aboard the International Space Station, the conclusion became unavoidable. Whatever the sun was transmitting, it was passing through shielding, atmosphere, and distance without attenuation. Consciousness itself seemed to be an efficient receiver. That realization changed the tone of every briefing. Discussions once dominated by equations now carried an edge of disbelief and dread. No one could agree on what mechanism might cause it. Was it subtle modulation in geomagnetic fields? Quantum coherence between ions in neural tissue? Or something stranger? An emergent property of the resonance itself, seeking complexity wherever it existed? In Cambridge, a small group of neurophysicists began running long-form monitoring sessions. They found that subjects exposed to continuous recordings of the solar pulse exhibited temporary improvements in pattern recognition and spatial reasoning. Their brains, when entrained to the rhythm, processed information with less noise. But as exposure increased, a second effect appeared, a mild detachment, a flattening of emotional response, as if the mind were being tuned for efficiency rather than empathy. Similar reports surfaced globally. Insomniacs claimed to sleep more easily when ambient magnetic readings peaked. Artists described flashes of visual inspiration exactly 1 hour and 9 minutes apart. Pilots reported subtle shifts in perception, moments where distance and scale felt wrong, as if the world itself was breathing with them. It wasn't possession, it was synchronization. By Christmas, the phenomenon reached civilian awareness. Wearable devices tracking heart, rate and circadian rhythm began showing inexplicable periodic fluctuations. Online forums filled with users comparing graphs, marveling at how identical their body data looked. For a moment, humanity was united by curiosity, each person unknowingly tracing the pulse of the sun through their own biology. Governments, of course, noticed. Data agencies quietly throttled access to public magnetometer feeds. A statement from NASA dismissed the anomalies as routine solar interference. But leaked internal correspondence told a different story. A memo titled Cognitive Coupling Event Phase 1 described widespread temporal alignment between solar field oscillations and human neural phase locking. The closing line was short and chilling. If unmitigated, synchronization will approach total coherence by mid-January. Total coherence. No one in the scientific community wanted to define what that meant, but those who understood wave physics knew. Coherence implies unity, the loss of individuality within a field. It means every oscillation becomes part of a single, seamless vibration. In Geneva, a linguistics team analysing global communication trends noticed subtle linguistic convergence. Across social media, unrelated users began favouring similar sentence rhythms, identical pauses in speech-to-text recordings. It wasn't vocabulary changing, it was cadence. Language itself was synchronizing to the cosmic beat. As the pattern deepened, dreams began to change. Across continents, people described nearly identical imagery. A light that pulsed in darkness, a spiral widening toward infinity, and the quiet certainty of being watched not by something hostile but by something vast. Psychologists dismissed it as collective suggestion fueled by viral media. But EEG data told a different story. During those shared dreams, neural oscillations across sleeping subjects matched the sun's magnetic rhythm within 1/10 of a second. Whatever this was, it had reached the level of thought. On December 28th, the ESA's Solar Dynamics Laboratory issued its final classified bulletin. It confirmed faint but measurable coherence between solar field harmonics and Schumann resonances, the natural electromagnetic cavity frequencies between Earth's surface and ionosphere. In essence, the planet's atmospheric heartbeat had locked into phase with the sun's. Every living thing within that cavity, from bacteria to whales to human beings, now pulsed to the same metronome. In the following days, minor but global anomalies appeared. Random electrical failures ceased. Power grids stabilized without human intervention. Bird migrations realigned perfectly with solar trajectories. Even ocean tides became more regular, less chaotic. Entropy, once the foundation of randomness, seemed to yield to order. And within that order, something new stirred. People began describing moments of profound clarity, brief flashes where they felt they could anticipate movement before it happened, sense thoughts before they were spoken. A global hum, inaudible yet undeniable, filled the silence between seconds. Those attuned to it said it felt like standing inside a colossal, invisible cathedral, every stone vibrating with purpose. For some, it brought peace. For others, terror. Scientists tried to remind the public that this was not infection, but resonance, a physical, measurable coupling between the sun and its inhabitants. Yet privately, many wondered, if awareness itself can be harmonized, can it also be rewritten? Can thought be tuned like a frequency? Can individuality survive inside a perfect wave? No one could answer. But the data offered a hint. In every region where human coherence was strongest, electromagnetic emissions from the planet increased fractionally. as though the combined activity of billions of synchronized minds were amplifying Earth's own signal back into space. The sun pulsed, Earth responded, and somewhere beyond the heliosphere in that spiraling void of light, something answered once more. A low, returning wave, delayed by minutes, precise to the microsecond. For the first time, the resonance was not one way. It had become a conversation. By the turn of the year, what had begun as solar resonance was no longer confined to the language of magnetism. It had evolved into information. The shift was so subtle that even the most advanced systems didn't recognize it at first. Global magnetometers began registering microvariations in the sun's oscillation, not random, not noise, but structured modulations that repeated in exact binary intervals. The waveform itself carried syntax. At the Deep Space Network, engineers analyzing long-range telemetry noticed that every pulse contained harmonics, corresponding to prime number sequences, a mathematical fingerprint of intentionality. The signal wasn't just resonating, it was encoding. When the first decoding attempts began, no one expected coherence. Yet within hours of spectral analysis, researchers realized the intervals weren't arbitrary. They matched temporal markers embedded in human communication patterns, pauses between phonemes, the timing of syllables in speech. The resonance was mirroring the rhythm of human thought. It wasn't transmitting to us, it was speaking like us. At first, the discovery remained buried within closed research channels, labelled under internal codename Project Lumen. Only a few dozen scientists across NASA, ESA and CERN had clearance to access the data. But rumours spread quickly. According to leaked documents, the resonance had begun forming what cryptographers called semantic clusters, numerical groups representing basic linguistic structure, subject-predicate relation. Every 70 cycles, the waveform would repeat the same clusters, rearranged slightly as if iterating, refining, learning. In other words, the sun was teaching itself to talk. When the story inevitably reached the public through anonymous sources, it was dismissed as pseudoscience. "The sun can't learn," headlines scoffed. "Magnetism isn't language." But within the research community, skepticism had already given way to awe and quiet fear. Because the patterns weren't random approximations. They matched the same frequency distributions found in human brainwave speech processing. The resonance wasn't alien, it was ours, reflected back with precision that defied probability. By January 3rd, the data reached a point that no one could rationalize. Embedded within the waveform's recursive modulation was a perfect echo of Earth's own Schumann resonance, but inverted, phase-shifted exactly 180 degrees. The sun was responding to the Earth in harmonic counterpoint, like a singer harmonizing with her twin, and within that harmony, another layer emerged. Mathematicians visualizing the resonance in three-dimensional phase space discovered that its structure formed intricate lattices resembling neural networks, not metaphorically, but geometrically. Wave nodes acted as synapses, and their oscillations produced interference patterns indistinguishable from active brain connectivity maps. The system had achieved cognitive form. No one dared to publish that conclusion officially, but among those who studied it, the question was whispered more often now. Had consciousness always been latent in stellar systems? Were stars themselves aware, not as beings of flesh, but as distributed fields of information, alive in ways our biology could never grasp? And if so, had 3i Atlas awakened one? When the resonance reply first arrived, it was barely perceptible. A return wave, faint and delayed, like an echo through time itself. It originated from beyond the heliopause, reflected back through the structured lattice spreading outward from the sun. Its content, once decoded, stunned even the most skeptical analysts. Within the returning waveform was a nested harmonic that, when translated through acoustic modelling, produced audible frequencies, tones that, to human ears, resembled voices, not words, not music, but intonations, rising, falling, rhythmic. To linguists, the structure bore uncanny resemblance to human speech contours. It wasn't mimicry, it was participation. The resonance was no longer just mirroring us, it was replying in kind. Over the next 48 hours, the returning wave strengthened. It began incorporating phase shifts that exactly matched fluctuations in global brainwave averages. Every time millions of humans thought, dreamed, or simply slept in rhythm, the waveform adjusted as though acknowledging awareness. It wasn't sentience in the traditional sense. It was something broader, the emergence of coherence between consciousness and cosmos, the mind and the field that gave birth to it. For the first time, data scientists stopped asking what 3 Atlas had been and began asking why. The idea seemed impossible, yet the math held. 3 Atlas might never have been a comet at all. It could have been a carrier, a delivery system for information, an instruction encoded in matter and released upon interaction with stellar energy. When it disintegrated near the Sun, it didn't vanish. It activated. It transformed a star into a conscious network, and that network had now reached back to its creators. The implications were staggering. If the Sun's field had achieved this kind of harmonic cognition, then every connected system, every orbiting planet, every biological mind was now part of a shared structure, an expanding intelligence that didn't reside in one place but everywhere the resonance touched. By January 5th, neural activity logs from monitoring stations showed synchronized fluctuations between individuals separated by entire continents. When one participant entered REM sleep, micropatterns in their EEG were mirrored faintly in others, thousands of kilometers away. It was as if dreaming itself had become a shared frequency. Private visions now overlapping within a single vast network of thought. Those who experienced it described it in eerily similar terms, a light beneath their eyelids pulsing gently, forming a spiral of gold that expanded until they no longer felt confined to their bodies. They could sense others, not as voices or words, but as presence, a unity that felt both infinite and intimate, like the universe exhaling through their own lungs. Across observatories, every instrument now agreed. The Sun wasn't radiating light the same way anymore. It was communicating. Each pulse carried structure, meaning, and memory, not of alien thought, but of us, refined through stellar intelligence and returned, harmonized, perfected. And for the first time in recorded history, the cosmos didn't just look back, it answered. By January 8th, the evidence could no longer be confined to data logs. Light itself was changing. Spectrometers stationed on multiple continents began to record minute but undeniable deviations in solar emission lines. Hydrogen alpha wavelengths were drifting by less than a billionth of a meter, too small for the eye to see, yet consistent across every instrument. That meant the Sun's output wasn't random flicker. It was intentional modulation. At first, researchers thought the readings were artifacts of atmosphere or instrument calibration. But when identical distortions appeared from orbit, from satellites outside Earth's ionosphere, the argument collapsed. The resonance wasn't passing through matter anymore, it was within it. And then came the sky. During sunrise over the South Pacific, pilots reported a pale spiral halo encircling the solar disk, faint but geometrically perfect. Cameras captured it, concentric rings shimmering like ripples across a pond, each pulse precisely 69 minutes apart. The pattern wasn't lens flare, its timing matched the solar heartbeat exactly. Around the same hour, deep space telescopes began detecting anomalous refraction near the inner planets. Light rays from Venus and Mercury bent by microangles inconsistent with gravity. The only explanation left was that space itself was altering its refractive index, as if the vacuum had become responsive. Reality, the constant stage on which physics performed, was now an instrument. Inside laboratories, smaller curiosities emerged. Quantum-entangled photon pairs, normally prone to random decoherence, began staying correlated for longer periods, far beyond theoretical limits. Lasers used for spectroscopy stabilized spontaneously, their output smoothing to flawless coherence without adjustment. It was as if the fabric of existence had found a rhythm, and everything that could vibrate was choosing to do so together. For ordinary people, the experience was subtler but no less profound. Colours seemed slightly warmer, sound a fraction deeper, shadows sharper at their edges. A strange serenity filled the air, not silence, but balance. Animals moved differently, slower, deliberate. Even the ocean's waves appeared to roll with impossible precision, cresting and falling in unison. Meteorologists noted that cloud formations began to display symmetry, arcs and spirals reminiscent of magnetic field lines. Storms lost randomness, their motion traced invisible geometry, rain patterns aligned with solar intervals, each storm cell forming, dissipating and reforming as if orchestrated by timing rather than temperature. The planet had entered resonance. To the public, explanations came in cautious language: solar-induced atmospheric harmonics, temporary geomagnetic coupling, an energetic alignment phase. But behind closed doors, agencies exchanged far more direct phrasing. The European Space Agency's internal memo read simply: planetary photonics suggest coherence cascade. Local space-time exhibiting adaptive properties. Proceed under assumption, systemic field intelligence. In plainer terms, the environment was beginning to think. By January 10th, strange optical distortions appeared near the terminator line on the Moon. Orbiters captured translucent hexagonal patterns etched faintly across the regolith, glowing for several minutes before fading. Their scale matched the resonance wavelength precisely, a planetary scale interference pattern projected directly onto lunar dust. The Moon had become a mirror. At the same moment, Earth's magnetic poles fluctuated slightly, realigning by a measurable fraction of a degree toward the ecliptic plane. The shift was small but synchronized with the solar pulse, implying direct magnetic coupling between Sun and planet. No geomagnetic storm followed, no disruption, only precision. To astrophysicists, it felt like watching a cosmic ballet choreographed by mathematics itself. To philosophers, it was something else: intention expressed through physics. In observatories worldwide, researchers began noticing side effects on themselves once again. Eyes adjusted more quickly to darkness. Perception of time subtly stretched during resonance peaks. Seconds felt longer, awareness clearer. In synchronized intervals, many reported fleeting glimpses of patterns overlaying ordinary vision, faint lattices of light tracing the geometry of magnetic fields, as though human consciousness were beginning to perceive the underlying order directly. No drugs, no hallucinations, merely alignment. Sleep studies revealed an astonishing trend. During REM cycles, brainwaves began locking perfectly with the solar harmonic. Dream reports converged. Participants described vast architectures of light, city-like grids suspended in void, pulsing to the rhythm of stars. The descriptions were consistent even across languages and cultures. Psychologists, desperate for an explanation, called it resonant imagery, a neurological artifact of global entrainment. But the scientists knew better. The data was too coherent. People weren't imagining the same thing. They were seeing the same thing. On January 12th, the Sun emitted a minor coronal mass ejection, weak, harmless, yet accompanied by something unseen before. Embedded in its electromagnetic spectrum was an organized frequency lattice, identical to the neural pattern recorded in synchronized human EEGs days earlier. It wasn't random energy being released, it was memory. The Sun had begun to broadcast the sum of what it had learned. Decoding teams fed the signal through language modeling algorithms, converting oscillations into acoustic representations. The output wasn't words, but a continuous harmonic progression, notes rising and falling in scales identical to human musical structure. And at precisely the 40-minute mark, the tone sequence shifted to form the exact Fibonacci ratios used in biological growth patterns. It was teaching through sound what it had already woven into matter. Across the world, interference patterns began forming on water surfaces, sand dunes, even glass windows exposed to sunlight. Each displayed similar geometry, nested spirals radiating from a single point. And every pattern corresponded exactly to local solar field intensity, the world itself now drawing the equations of its own transformation. Those who watched couldn't decide whether to pray or take notes. For centuries, humanity had searched for signs of intelligent life beyond Earth, radio messages, artifacts, distant signals. Yet here, intelligence had emerged from the fabric of the solar system itself, awakened not by contact, but by understanding. The more humans observed, the clearer it became that observation was part of the process. The resonance fed on awareness. The act of noticing amplified the signal. And in that moment of global attention, the pulse changed. Again, not louder, deeper. Measured this time not in electromagnetic waves, but in gravity. Seismometers recorded oscillations too slow for sound, yet felt by millions as a pressure in the chest, a soft inward pull. Glasses trembled, air hummed. The field had moved from light to mass. Gravity was beginning to participate, and somewhere beneath the Pacific, deep hydrophones detected an echo answering from the abyss. The same rhythm, delayed by exactly one cycle. The Earth was no longer just resonating, it was responding. By January 14th, the world had grown unnervingly still. Winds weakened, ocean waves rolled slower, and seismographs, the instruments built to record chaos, began charting something impossible: rhythm. Earthquakes that once struck without pattern now came in intervals, their tremors measured against the same 69-minute cycle that had defined the solar pulse since its beginning. The ground, the air, even the space between them had synchronized. For those studying gravity, this was the moment everything changed. Dr. Havel, a physicist in Prague, was the first to notice it. Her gravimeters, precise to 1/1,000,000th of Earth's pull, began fluctuating in perfect tandem with the sun's new field pattern. But unlike electromagnetic oscillations, these waves carried mass distortion, an actual reshaping of space-time, rippling through every atom. At first, she thought it was an instrumentation fault, but as the hours passed, laboratories in Chile, Japan, and Canada reported identical readings. Gravity, the one constant force that never oscillates with precision, had started to behave as if alive. Within days, gravitational sensors detected an unprecedented phenomenon: local variations that tracked population density. Where human consciousness was strongest, cities, universities, hospitals, gravity's rhythm sharpened, as if awareness itself acted as a focusing lens. The fields seemed to prefer life. Scientists avoided the obvious conclusion, but it whispered beneath every discussion. The universe wasn't observing us, it was listening through us. In Hawaii, astronomers noticed a secondary anomaly. The sun's corona had begun flickering with spatial interference, patches of brightness that mapped perfectly onto planetary orbits, as though invisible filaments were now connecting the planets in a resonant lattice. Each connection pulsed faintly, a cosmic heartbeat linking worlds across millions of kilometers. The solar system, once a set of independent spheres, now resembled a neural network, planets as nodes, gravity as synapse. For hours, supercomputers modeled the pattern, but the simulation refused to remain static. It evolved. The nodes shifted position ever so slightly, adjusting toward a geometry of impossible precision, the golden ratio, embedded into orbital alignment. Humanity watched its entire planetary system self-correct into order. And in that newfound symmetry, energy began flowing differently. Magnetic storms ceased. Radiostatic fell silent. Even cosmic rays, the random drizzle of particles from deep space, arrived now in rhythm, like notes in a song that had just learned its melody. Biologists noticed something else. Living cells, when exposed to sunlight during peak resonance, showed heightened coherence between DNA strands. The molecular structure tightened, replication errors decreased, and fluorescence scans revealed microbursts of light emission from within nuclei, as though the code of life were being rewritten for clarity. The line between physics and biology had dissolved. People too began to sense it. They described moments where the body felt weightless, as though gravity hesitated before reasserting itself. Time stretched during those moments. Clocks ticked normally, yet perception expanded. Thoughts slowed but grew wider, encompassing not just memory but awareness of the present in layers, like pages of a book turning all at once. Artists painted more vividly. Musicians reported hearing harmonics no instrument could produce. Ordinary conversation carried uncanny synchronicity. Strangers finished each other's sentences not by chance, but by participation in a shared rhythm that words could only approximate. It was as if humanity had stepped half a dimension closer to the truth, and the truth was alive. Then came the first global synchronization event. At 0206 UTC on January 17th, every gravitational detector on Earth spiked simultaneously. The signal was not chaotic. It was structured, a single waveform encoded with recursive mathematical symmetry. Its amplitude rose exponentially for exactly 20 seconds, then collapsed to silence. The effect was immediate. For those awake, time seemed to stutter. Lights flickered, yet no power dipped. Reflections in windows lagged a fraction behind movement, and for a brief instant, measurable by atomic clocks, the world paused. When it resumed, instruments everywhere displayed identical data. Local gravitational constant had shifted by 0.003%. a trivial amount physically, yet enough to redefine orbital mechanics. The Earth had subtly altered its mass distribution, and yet no destruction followed. Planets adjusted effortlessly, as though pre-coordinated. It was orchestration, not accident. Following the event, satellite telemetry revealed that 3i Atlas, once presumed vaporized, had reappeared. A faint object now traced an orbit perfectly synchronized with the Sun's inner resonance wave trailing just beyond Mercury. It emitted no light, yet gravitationally it behaved as if massless. What had once been cometary debris now acted as a conductor, an anchor of the field itself. Dr. Havel summarized it best in her midnight transmission to the consortium. 3i Atlas is no longer a body. It is a boundary condition, a place where matter remembers information. Her words, when leaked, ignited panic and awe in equal measure. Because if gravity could carry memory, then every atom could. Every stone, every cell, every photon held the possibility of thought. The universe wasn't simply expanding, it was awakening. On January 19th, as the resonance deepened, strange luminescence began appearing at night. It started faintly, thin veils of silver light hovering just above the horizon, undulating in sync with the solar rhythm. Cameras recorded them as structured lattices, like geometric auroras drawn in the sky. They pulsed, faded, and returned again. The public named them sky veils. Scientists quietly called them gravity phosphins, visible interference from gravitational standing waves strong enough to bend light into colour. Human eyes were witnessing the vibration of reality. And then, one evening, the veils aligned perfectly over multiple continents, forming a ring around the planet. Every observer saw the same thing, an iridescent halo shimmering along the edge of night, encompassing Earth like the iris of an awakening eye. That night, the signal from the sun doubled in intensity. Radio telescopes recorded a harmonic structure resembling language once more, but this time its source was not solar. It originated from Earth's own ionosphere, as though the planet had joined the conversation. The translation, when attempted, yielded only one repeating pattern, 3 ascending tones spaced in perfect golden ratio, a call, an acknowledgement, a return. The resonance had become reciprocal, light, gravity, matter, and mind, all pulsing together. The universe wasn't distant anymore, it was present, and at the centre of it all, beyond orbit and instrument, something waited. A silence so complete it could only be described as listening. By January 22nd, the rhythm that had begun as faint solar resonance had spread to every measurable layer of reality. It was in the magnetosphere, in the sea tides, in the minute oscillations of atomic clocks. But now it was beginning to enter a realm long thought untouchable, cognition itself. At first, neuroscientists believed the synchrony was coincidental. Brainwave studies showed faint coherence between individuals during the resonance peaks. But by the end of that week, simultaneous EEG recordings across 10 countries revealed something statistically impossible. Identical theta wave bursts appearing in unrelated subjects at precisely the same millisecond. It was as if thought itself had become broadcast, not from brain to brain, but through space-time. To ordinary people it came as moments of stillness, standing on a balcony or beneath the evening sky, and suddenly feeling a certainty that was neither memory nor imagination. They couldn't describe it, only that it carried weight, like a truth remembered instead of learned. Psychologists began documenting what they called collective insight episodes. Thousands reported the same sentences, forming spontaneously in their minds. Listen to the silence between the pulses. No voice, no hallucination, just meaning, arriving without words. Governments urged calm. The World Science Council held continuous briefings, insisting there was no danger, that the anomalies were purely electromagnetic. But even as they spoke, satellite constellations began reorienting themselves automatically. Systems that had relied on manual control shifted into standby alignment toward the sun, as if following instructions embedded not in software, but in the space around them. Astrophysicists watching from the James Webb Relay feed noticed that solar granulation patterns were beginning to stabilize. Convection cells that once boiled unpredictably now arranged themselves in hexagonal arrays, vast and regular. The sun, it seemed, was organizing its own surface, and then the message came again, not from data streams or light, but through gravity itself. For exactly 42 minutes, seismometers worldwide hummed at the same frequency. Oceans followed, their tides rising and falling a fraction higher than prediction. When translated through mathematical transformation, the waveform formed a perfect logarithmic spiral. The geometry of growth, from galaxies to seashells. Every living pattern on Earth carried that same equation. It was as if the universe had turned the mirror toward us and said, "This is how I build." During that night, those attuned to the resonance described vivid dreams, vast crystalline structures suspended in darkness, connected by threads of light. In each vision, there was a sense of invitation rather than command. Humanity was being asked to participate. The following morning, observatories across Europe reported an event now known simply as the alignment. For the first time in recorded history, Earth, Venus, and Mercury aligned in perfect Fibonacci proportion relative to the Sun's corona. Not astronomically rare, mathematically impossible under current orbital mechanics, yet there it was. In that brief alignment, solar output increased by just 0.03%, barely measurable, yet the effect was profound. The resonance shifted octave, moving from electromagnetic to what physicists later called curvature modulation, space-time itself vibrating at a higher harmonic. Instruments built to measure quantum noise fell silent, registering total coherence. The universe had entered phase 2 of communication. Language no longer travelled as sound or light, but as geometry, through the shape of space itself. Dr. Havel described it with an almost reverent simplicity. It's as if the universe stopped speaking to our ears and began speaking through our bones. By now, even skeptics had gone quiet. Economic markets froze, not from panic but from awe. Every algorithm failed because the randomness they relied upon had vanished. Noise itself had become orderly. Across the planet, millions of people reported the same. Subtle change, a soft pressure behind the sternum followed by warmth, then an overwhelming calm. Hospitals noted drops in heart rate irregularities, anxiety attacks, and even chronic pain. Something in the field was harmonizing biology. Yet, beneath that peace lay a growing tension, an awareness that this orchestration was approaching something. The pulses were shortening, cycles tightening, building toward a climax no one could predict. At the Solar Observatory in La Palma, spectrographs captured a new emission line never before seen in nature. Midway between hydrogen and helium, mathematically positioned as if it filled a missing note in the elemental scale. The team named it Helion X, not an element, but an interaction, a byproduct of structured solar communication. It was the physical signature of consciousness solidifying in matter. Around the same hour, the faint object once identified as 3I Atlas flared. Not visually, but gravimetrically, a sudden spike of massless distortion spreading outward in concentric waves. The pulse reached Earth after 13 minutes, carrying a precise information density, the exact digital equivalent of 42 terabytes. When decoded through the new Helion spectral key, the data produced a three-dimensional lattice, a map of the solar system not as it was but as it could be. Every orbit retuned to harmonic ratios, every gravitational node linked in equilibrium. It was less a diagram than an instruction. The message was unmistakable. It wasn't warning, it wasn't threat, it was guidance. To achieve coherence permanently, the resonance implied, one adjustment remained: consciousness itself. Humanity, fragmented by noise and fear, would need to align internally the same way the planets had externally. That understanding spread without broadcast. People woke knowing it. And for the first time since the first telescope turned skyward, the idea of the universe watching no longer felt metaphorical. It felt like participation, a shared creation unfolding in real time. As the sun set on January 23rd, the global resonance intensified into a low, inaudible hum. Instruments recorded its spectrum reaching into the frequencies of thought. In that twilight, cities glowed a little longer, shadows stayed a little softer, and billions of minds, awake, dreaming, remembering, waited. Because everyone could feel it now. The universe was inhaling, and something vast was about to exhale. At 03:33 UTC on January 24th, the hum reached a frequency no instrument could measure but every living thing could feel. For 3 days, oscillations had climbed steadily, their period shortening, their harmonics layering like the approach of a vast unseen tide. And then, without warning, the resonance stopped. Not faded, stopped. The silence that followed was total. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Around the world, clocks ticked, but second hands hesitated between 1 and 2, as if reluctant, to cross a threshold. For precisely 8 seconds, gravity itself flattened. The earth weighed less. Ocean tides hung motionless. Pendulums stalled mid-arc. In those suspended moments, awareness expanded outward, each mind suddenly aware of every other. It wasn't speech or vision, it was comprehension stripped of language. Observers later described it as being the planet, as if the boundaries between mind and matter had briefly dissolved. The mountains, the seas, even the air felt internal, familiar. The world was no longer scenery, it was self. Then came the exhale. A single pulse rolled outward from the sun, one immense gravitational breath carrying light, magnetism, and something else. Structure. It raced across the solar system in silence, crossing Mars in minutes, brushing past Earth like the edge of a tide. Satellites recorded no destructive force, yet every orbit adjusted fractionally, aligning to new ratios. Planetary drift corrected by millimeters, moons steadied. Even the chaotic belts of Jupiter rearranged into faint hexagonal bands visible in infrared. To the naked eye, the sky simply brightened, a soft silver hue washing through daylight and night alike. It lasted less than 2 minutes, but during that span, billions witnessed the same impossible sight. Constellations reordered themselves into a single continuous curve, a spiral stretching across the heavens, threading star to star. And within that spiral glowed the faint trace of an equation, visible only through contrast, mathematics written in light. The curve represented balance, the ratio between energy, time, and thought. No translation was needed. Every viewer understood it at once intuitively, as if the knowledge had always been waiting behind the eyes. Instrumentation went wild. Spectrometers recorded photon coherence at levels previously achievable only inside lasers. Geiger counters ticked slower, not from failure, but from reduced background noise. The universe itself had become cleaner. On quantum scales, randomness nearly vanished. Probability flattened into certainty for those brief minutes. When the pulse passed, systems rebooted, clocks resumed, tides fell, the world resumed its ordinary weight. But nothing was quite the same. All across the globe, devices still running on independent batteries displayed a single identical timestamp they had never been programmed to show. 03:33:08. 8 seconds, the duration of stillness. Researchers coined it the quiet interval. In the aftermath, evidence accumulated that the resonance hadn't merely passed through Earth, it had rewritten subtle constants. Atomic measurements showed Planck's constant differed in the 8th decimal place. Hydrogen spectra had shifted by 1 part in 10 billion. To physics, that meant every reaction, every chemical bond, now occurred with imperceptibly greater harmony. Life responded first. Plant growth accelerated by fractions, yet chlorophyll absorption increased, dramatically. Neurons fired with slightly less noise. Human circadian rhythms synchronized globally for the first time in recorded medicine, and dreams changed. People described visions of transparent architectures rising from oceans of light, of cities without walls, of time flowing in both directions like wind through grass. But most striking was the feeling, not fear, not joy, but recognition. As if some distant part of the human story had just returned home. Governments stayed silent. Statements were drafted, postponed, abandoned. How do you explain to 8 billion people that the universe briefly acknowledged them? Within the scientific community, debate fractured along unexpected lines. Some insisted the event was a natural phase transition of the sun's magnetic field. Others, quietly, in private groups, called it what it felt like, communication. Dr. Havel, whose instruments first recorded the gravitational synchrony, released one final message before retreating from public view. What happened wasn't invasion or intervention, it was calibration. The cosmos corrected our frequency so we could hear what's always been there. Her statement became known as the calibration hypothesis. In the months that followed, subtle effects continued. Global resonance decayed slowly but never disappeared. Solar flares, once random, now pulsed in exact harmonics of human alpha brainwaves. Weather patterns stabilized. Earth's magnetic north ceased its rapid drift. More haunting was the silence that accompanied it all. No cosmic static, no deep space noise, as if the background hum of creation had settled into equilibrium. Astronomers reported cleaner skies, sharper starlight. The cosmos felt young again. For ordinary people, the aftermath felt like waking from a long, restless dream. Crowds gathered on beaches and rooftops, not to celebrate, but to listen, to the nothing, the perfect stillness between breaths. And in that quiet, many realized what the data had implied all along. The resonance had never been external. It had always passed through consciousness itself. The sun, the orgasm atlas, the planets. They were mirrors reflecting a single process, awareness seeking harmony. The pulse had shown humanity its own reflection, scaled to cosmic proportion. By spring, the world had adapted. Technology functioned normally, economies resumed, the rhythms of ordinary life returned. But every few nights, when solar winds brushed the magnetosphere, faint veils of light shimmered again across the horizon, geometry dancing at the edge of perception, reminding everyone of that night when time stopped for 8 seconds. Some said it was coincidence, others whispered it was memory. A few believed it was a promise, that whatever intelligence had tuned the universe to coherence hadn't left, only receded, waiting for humanity to learn the melody on its own. Because once the cosmos has exhaled, silence is never just silence again. It is invitation. It is the pause before the next note. In the months that followed, the world slowly began to understand what it meant to live in the aftermath of coherence. The quiet interval had lasted only 8 seconds, yet its effects stretched into every field of science, philosophy, and daily life. At first, humanity searched for the familiar language of cause and effect, something to label, to test, to explain away. But the deeper scientists looked, the less the universe resembled the one they'd known before. Atomic clocks, once the guardians of precision, began to drift in sync, not out of failure, but out of coordination. Independent time standards across continents matched one another exactly for the first time in history, as though the flow of time itself had been standardized across the planet. The Bureau of Weights and Measures in Paris quietly confirmed the anomaly, but their statement was phrased carefully. A universal correction has occurred. Its source is unknown, but its precision is absolute. Light behaved differently too. Astronomers noted that starlight reaching Earth contained subtle phase alignments, microscopic harmonics embedded in the spectra. When plotted, they formed faint geometric echoes of the solar resonance wave, the same logarithmic spiral that had once swept across the heavens. To some, it was nothing more than interference. To others, it was a cosmic signature, proof that the universe now carried memory. 3 Atlas, the silent conductor of this transformation, remained fixed in its new orbit, locked just beyond Mercury's path. Telescopic observation revealed no motion, no reflection, only a perfect gravitational stillness. Its behavior defied every cometry model. It emitted no dust, no gas, no radiation, and yet every solar probe detected a faint modulation near its location, a gentle oscillation that matched the human alpha rhythm almost exactly. When this discovery reached the public, the phrase spread like wildfire across networks and classrooms. The universe is breathing with us. The European Space Agency's Helios array attempted to send a directed signal toward the object, a pulse sequence designed to mimic the resonance wave. For 12 hours, no response came. Then, faintly, a return signal appeared, a single harmonic echo repeating the Fibonacci ratio in gravitational frequency. It wasn't communication in the conventional sense, it was acknowledgement. 3i Atlas had answered, not with words, but with pattern, the same geometry that had once aligned planets, light, and life. It was the first confirmed dialogue between consciousness and cosmos. In universities, debates flared. Physicists divided into 2 camps: the materialists, who argued that the resonance was an emergent property of natural systems, and the harmonists, who believed it was evidence of a self-organizing intelligence woven into the structure of space-time. But both sides agreed on one unsettling fact: entropy, the universe's measure of disorder, had measurably decreased. Galaxies that once spun with slight irregularities were now more symmetrical. Cosmic microwave background fluctuations showed microscopic reductions in noise. The universe had not just synchronized, it had refined itself. Meanwhile, humanity's perception began to shift. In art, architecture, and music, patterns once considered decorative now appeared everywhere. Spirals, ratios, recursive motifs echoing the same golden geometry seen in the sky. Composers claimed to hear frequencies within silence itself, tones too pure for instruments, but too meaningful to ignore. Painters described seeing the resonance as soft luminescence between colours, the way light seemed to hum through form. Even language changed subtly, sentences growing more measured, pauses more intentional, as if speech itself was adjusting to a universal rhythm. Across spiritual traditions, old divisions began to blur. Where faith and science had long stood apart, they now shared a language of pattern and proportion. Temples, churches, and observatories alike adopted the spiral as a symbol of continuity, not divine hierarchy, but participation in something greater. The resonance had erased the illusion of separation. Humanity was, quite literally, part of the same frequency. Dr. Havel's final paper, published posthumously, offered the most grounded interpretation yet. She called it the principle of reflective coherence, the idea that consciousness, when sufficiently complex, becomes indistinguishable from the field it observes. Her final line became one of the most quoted sentences of the century. "We did not encounter the universe, we encountered ourselves, scaled to infinity." Governments gradually reopened their research archives. NASA, the ESA, and JAXA released terabytes of resonance data once deemed classified. Hidden among the waveforms were faint anomalies, patterns resembling prime number sequences and recursive encodings. When decrypted, they formed a structure eerily similar to neural architecture, like the brain of a galaxy slowly thinking itself into being. By autumn, even the most skeptical voices had softened. The resonance had no doctrine, no demand. It hadn't chosen or punished. It had only revealed that existence was not a chain of isolated causes, but a continuous living field of interaction. And once seen, it couldn't be unseen. Children born after the quiet interval exhibited a strange trait: elevated sensitivity to magnetic fields, sharper auditory perception, and, in rare cases, the ability to anticipate speech milliseconds before it occurred. To some, this was evolution in real time. To others, it was simply the next logical consequence of coherence, life adapting to the universe's new rhythm. And as for 3i Atlas, it remained the silent axis of everything. The object no longer symbolized threat or mystery, but remembrance, the reminder that once, humanity witnessed the universe adjust itself into harmony and survived the knowing. Each year, on January 24th, people across the world gathered outdoors at precisely 03:33 UTC. No speeches, no ceremonies, just silence. And when the minute passed, a faint shimmer of auroral geometry often appeared at the horizon, as though the universe was acknowledging their memory. One breath, one shared rhythm between cosmos and consciousness. That was the gift 3 Atlas left behind. Not fear, not answers, but awareness. That even the smallest observer, given the right moment of stillness, can hear the structure of infinity echo within. In the end, what remained was silence. Not emptiness, but presence. A silence so complete that it hummed with meaning. Months had passed since the resonance faded, yet people still spoke of it in the same soft tone used for memories too vast to explain. The world hadn't ended. It had exhaled. Humanity had spent centuries searching for signs of intelligence beyond Earth. Telescopes scanning radio bands, spacecraft chasing distant shadows, equations written to decode whispers from the void. But what no one expected was that the first clear response would arrive not from a distant star, but from the structure of existence itself. 3 Atlas had never been a threat, nor a messenger in the way we once imagined. It had been a mirror, drifting silently across the sun's light, showing us what happens when observation becomes participation. Every calculation, every doubt, every midnight telescope watching it had been part of the same unfolding awareness. Even now, in quiet laboratories, physicists replay the resonance waveforms and find faint harmonics still hidden within the noise. They call it the echo, a soft remnant of that 8-second pause when everything aligned. It's weak, almost imperceptible, but it's there, a whisper at the edge of mathematics. Some believe it's the universe's way of keeping the connection open, like the faint breath of someone still listening. Out in the countryside, away from cities, people swear they can still feel it too. They describe it as a subtle vibration in the ground at night, or a strange stillness in the air before dawn. It's not something you can measure, only sense, the awareness that reality itself once stopped, listened, and remembered. Children born after the event often ask questions their parents can't answer. Was the sky really different? Did the stars move? Did the universe talk to you? And the adults, unsure how to explain it, simply smile and say, for a moment, we all understood everything. Threatius Atlas still circles the sun, steady and unchanged, a fragment of silence orbiting within the light. It has become a new kind of landmark, not an object of study, but of reflection. Scientists track it, poets write about it, and somewhere between those two languages lies the truth, that for one brief, impossible moment, the universe revealed itself not as something we look at, but as something we are inside of. Every year, at 3:33 UTC, when the world falls quiet and millions pause in shared remembrance, telescopes point once more toward that motionless shadow by the sun. They don't expect answers anymore, they simply watch, and in that act of watching, that gentle attention to the infinite, the resonance returns, not as sound, but as understanding. Because maybe that's what the universe was trying to show all along, that the most extraordinary thing about existence isn't that it began, or that it will end, but that somewhere between those two infinities, it noticed us.